I've stood outside Buckingham Palace more times than I can count. You know how it is. You take visitors. You take your kids when they're small and they want to see the king's house. You take yourself sometimes when London gets too loud and too fast and you just want to stand still in front of something old and certain for a while, something that was there long before you and will be there long after. And every single time the guards are the same. Still, straight, eyes forward, chins level, like they've been poured into the shape of a man rather than born into one. I used to think nothing on this earth could move them. I'd seen people try. I'd seen a girl blow a kiss right in a guard's face. I'd seen a drunk lad on a stag do sing an entire football chant 6 inches from a soldier's nose. I'd seen a toddler scream loud enough to crack glass, and not one of them ever got so much as a blink. So I told myself, that's just how they are, stone, trained out of everything human. I was wrong, completely wrong. And it took an old man, a hot Tuesday, and a stranger named Sophie to show me just how wrong. What I'm about to tell you happened in the middle of July in the worst of a heat wave, the kind the news kept putting warnings out about. And I promise you, I'll swear it on anything you put in front of me, I watched a king's guard break. Not loudly, not in a way that made the papers. Most of the crowd didn't even understand what they'd seen. But I understood. I was close enough. And I have never, not for one day since, been able to put it down. It started with an old man in a blazer. And it ended with a woman in flat shoes, who did the one thing none of the rest of us had the courage to do. Let me take you all the way back to the start of it. It was about 11:30 in the morning, and the city was already cooking. It was that flat, heavy kind of heat where the air doesn't move at all. No breeze off the park. No mercy. The pavement had been soaking up sun since dawn, and it gave it all back up through the soles of your shoes, so your feet felt it before the rest of you did. I remember I'd worn a black shirt. Don't ask me why, I knew the forecast, and within 20 minutes of getting there it was stuck to my back like a second skin, and I kept thinking, you absolute idiot, you do this to yourself every time. My niece Ria was down visiting from up north. 17, phone permanently in hand, the way they all are, and she'd never once seen the changing of the guard. Her mum, my sister, had made me promise to take her somewhere proper London while she was down, and this was the most proper London thing I could think of. So there we were, the two of us, wedged into a crowd of about 400 strangers all pressed up along the black railings, every one of us slowly roasting and pretending we weren't. You could smell that crowd. That's a thing nobody tells you about these big tourist moments, the smell of them. Sun cream, thick and coconutty. Hot metal off the railings where 100 hands had been gripping them. Somebody's takeaway coffee gone cold and sour. A nappy that needed changing somewhere off to my right. And under all of it, that warm bread smell that big crowds get in the heat, hundreds of bodies packed too close. And the sound. There's always more sound than you'd think. A baby grizzling and winding up toward a proper cry. 2 women behind me deep in an argument about whether they'd booked the wrong tour. A street performer somewhere off to the left absolutely murdering a song on a steel drum, the same 8 bars over and over. And the click and rustle of 400 phones held up at once. Everybody filming the same few minutes of footage that nobody on God's earth will ever sit down and watch again. Tourists mostly. You can always spot them. The brand new Union Jack t-shirt still creased from the packet. The bloke holding the fold-out map upside down and turning slowly on the spot like a lost compass. A big loud group of teenagers, Spanish, I think, or Italian, taking it in turns to stand bolt upright next to the railings doing impressions of the guards, going stiff and cross-eyed while their mates filmed it and howled. Harmless. Just kids. But loud. And through all of it, the guards just stood there. There were 2 I could see properly from where we'd ended up. One nearer to us, one further down by the sentry box. The near one, and I want to be honest, I never learned his name, and somehow over the years that's come to feel right, like he should stay nameless, like he belongs to all of us that way. The near one was young. You could tell even under the bearskin and the chin strap and all the rest of it. Young jaw. Smooth skin. barely needing a shave, 23, 24 at the most. And there was a thin line of sweat running down the side of his face from under the fur, slow, all the way to his jaw, and he didn't wipe it. Couldn't. They're not allowed. Rhea looked up at him and said, "Doesn't he get like boiling, in all that fur?" And I gave her one of those useless grown-up answers. They're trained for it, love. As if you can train a person out of being a person, as if discipline turns the heat off. That's the thing I keep coming back to even now. We stand there and we look at them like they're part of the architecture. We point, we pose. We forget completely that there's a man inside all that wool and fur, a boy in this case, somebody's son. Somebody who woke up that morning in a bunk somewhere, had his breakfast, spent God knows how long getting that uniform exactly right, polishing those boots till he could see his own face in them, and then put it all on and walked out and became a thing for the rest of us to gawp at and imitate. I forgot it too. I want to be honest about that. I stood there forgetting it, same as everyone, right up until the moment I couldn't anymore. The old man, I noticed him before anything happened, and I've asked myself why 100 times, 400 people, and my eye just went and landed on him and stayed. He was standing a little apart from the main press of the crowd, over by the corner of the railings, in a spot most people had drifted away from because the view wasn't as good from there. And maybe that was it. Maybe in all that movement and noise he was the one still point, and the eye finds the still point. He had a blazer on. In that heat, a proper blazer navy, the wool gone slightly green at the seams and the cuffs the way old dark fabric does when it's lived a long life. And on the breast of it medals, real ones. Not the gift shop kind, not the shiny novelty stuff. 3 of them, maybe 4, the ribbons faded almost colorless, the metal gone dull, and they hung a touch crooked, the way they do when an old pair of hands has pinned them on alone that morning in front of a mirror, fingers not quite steady anymore. He had a regimental tie on, knotted up too tight at a collar that was a size too big now, the way collars get too big when a body shrinks with age. White hair, what was left of it, combed flat and careful across his head. And he stood God the way he stood, shoulders back, spine straight as the railings, chin up and level, like he was on parade. Like 60 years had gone by, and his body still wouldn't let him forget how to stand to attention, like it had been pressed into him, so deep it was part of the bone now. I thought, that's a veteran. That's a man who came here on purpose. Not a man who wandered into the crowd by accident, but a man who got dressed for this, who looked at himself in the mirror this morning and decided today was the day. And he wasn't filming. That was the other thing. In a sea of 400 phones, his hands were empty and down at his sides. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was just looking at the young guard, the near one, the boy in the bearskin, with an expression I couldn't quite read from where I stood. Something proud, something sad, something open and aching. The kind of look that lives on a face right at the very end of a long, long story. I nudged Rhea. "See that gentleman, over there by the corner, the medals." She glanced across, gave it a polite second. "Yeah. Bet you anything he served. Long time ago, look how he's standing." She wasn't all that interested, and that's fair enough, she's 17. And the band had started up just then anyway. All the brass and the big drum coming round the corner, and the whole crowd surged forward against the railings to see, a ripple running through all those bodies at once. I lost sight of the old man for a minute in the crush. Forgot about him, even. The music does that. It pulls all your attention to the spectacle, the color, the noise. When the band settled and the crowd loosened off a little and everyone shuffled back, I looked over to the corner again, almost without meaning to. And the old man wasn't standing the same way anymore. He was swaying. Only slightly at first. Side to side, gentle, the way you do standing on the deck of a boat. His right hand had come up off his side and found the railing, and now it was gripping it white at the knuckle. I could see that even from where I was, and his head had dropped forward a degree or two. That straight, proud spine had started to go soft at the top, curving like something heavy was pressing down on the back of his neck. I felt it before my brain had even finished understanding it. That cold drop right through the middle of you. Your stomach knows before your head does. Something's wrong over there. A woman standing near him noticed too. I watched her. She half turned, looked at him properly for a second, and then she looked away again. Turned right back to the guards, to the show, to the easy, bright thing in front of her. And I understood exactly why, because it's the same thing in all of us. Not her business. Somebody else will see to it. He's probably just hot, just tired, just old. Don't make a fuss. Don't be the one who makes it real. So she turned back to her phone and her view, and the old man kept swaying, and the crowd kept clapping for the band. Then his knees went. Not all at once. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, almost soft, almost polite. The railing held him for a second, his arm hooking over the top bar, taking his weight, and then his legs just stopped doing their job, and his weight came down off them, and he folded down onto that burning pavement like a coat slipping off a hook. His flat cap came off and rolled a little way and stopped. The metals on his chest clinked against the metal railing on the way down. A small, sad sound. I can still hear it. And here is the part of this story that I am most ashamed of, and I'm going to tell it to you straight, because if I clean it up, the rest of it means nothing. Nobody moved. 400 people, and for what felt like a year but was really, I suppose, 4 or 5 seconds, not one single person in that crowd moved a muscle to help him. People turned. People saw, eyes went to him, mouths opened, somebody near him gasped, a short, sharp sound. But nobody went. We just stood and looked at an old man lying on the ground in the heat, all of us waiting, all of us caught in that horrible frozen second where every person is waiting for some other person to be the first one to act. And because everyone's waiting, nobody does. And that gap is where the worst things in the world get to happen. And one man, I have to tell you this part too, even though it turns my stomach to this day, one man at the front actually lifted his phone higher, to get a better angle, to film an old soldier collapsing on the pavement outside the palace, to get the content. I wanted to be sick. I wanted to climb over the people in front of me and knock it out of his hand. But did I? No. I'd love to sit here and tell you I shoved through and got to him first. I didn't. I froze too. Exactly the same as everyone else. There's a name for it. I've read about it since the bystander effect. They call it this paralysis that grips a crowd where the more people there are watching, the less likely any one of them is to act, because the responsibility gets spread so thin across so many that it lands on no one. I was part of that crowd. I was one of the frozen ones. I'm not proud of it, but I won't pretend otherwise. The old man was down on the pavement. His chest was going too fast and too shallow, little rapid movements. His cap was on the ground by his head. And his lips had gone a color that lips are not supposed to go, a kind of gray-blue at the edges, and I knew somewhere in the animal part of me, I knew that this was bad. This was real. This was a man who might die right here in front of 400 people and all their phones. And the young guard, the boy in the bearskin, I saw his eyes move. I swear to you on my life I did. Just his eyes, nothing else. The smallest flick downward toward the man on the ground. A break of less than a second in that forward stare. And then they snapped back, front, level, dead ahead, because that is what he has sworn to do. He is not a paramedic. He is not a passerby. He is a soldier standing post in front of the monarch's home, and the entire meaning of him is that he does not move. That he holds. That the world can fall apart in front of him and he holds the line. That's the whole point of him. That's what we come to look at. But his jaw moved. I was close enough to see it. A tightening, a clench, the muscle standing out at the corner. And his throat worked once, hard, like he was swallowing something down. He knew, he'd seen, and he could not move. And you could see if you were looking, and almost nobody was. They were all looking at the man on the ground. You could see exactly what holding still was costing that boy. That is the moment Sophie came through the crowd. I didn't know her name yet, of course. I'd learn it in the next minute or two, and I'll tell you how. At the time, she was just a voice and then a shape pushing forward. Mid-30s, maybe. Sensible flat shoes. I noticed the shoes, oddly, in all of it, because everyone else was in sandals and trainers and she was in these plain, practical flat shoes. A canvas bag worn crossways over her body. Hair tied back off her face. Completely, utterly ordinary. The kind of woman you'd stand next to on the tube for 20 minutes and never once actually see. She'd been somewhere behind me, I think. I don't know where she came from, not really. One second the crowd was a frozen wall, and the next there was this clear, sharp voice cutting straight through all the murmur and the steel drum and the babies crying. "Move, move, please let me through, now." And she came through. She just put her hands up and pushed straight through that wall of stuck, staring people like they were a set of curtains, parting them, and she crossed the open space and went straight down onto her knees on that burning pavement beside the old man without 1/2 second of hesitation. Didn't think about her trousers. Didn't think about the 400 faces. Didn't reach for a phone. She just went down beside him like he was the only thing in London that mattered. Sir, can you hear me? Can you open your eyes for me?" 2 fingers laid against the side of his neck. Calm, steady. She tilted his head back a touch, looked into his mouth, then leaned her own face right down close to his, turning her cheek to his lips, watching his chest at the same time, feeling for breath, looking for it, listening for it, all at once. Every movement quick, sure, economical. No wasted motion. No panic anywhere in her at all. And it landed on me in a rush, she knows. This is not a kind stranger guessing and hoping. This is somebody who has done this exact thing 100 times before. She lifted her head and swept her eyes across the crowd, and they were hard now, all the softness gone out of them, all business. "He needs an ambulance, right now. I need someone to call 999, not film call." Her eyes went straight to the man at the front, the one who'd lifted his phone, and his whole face went red, caught, ashamed. You're going to call them this second, put it on speaker, and you repeat to them exactly what I say, word for word. Go, now." And it was the strangest thing that broke it. The whole spell. That one woman kneeling on the ground giving orders, and suddenly the crowd remembered it had hands and feet and voices of its own. It's a strange thing to watch happen, that turning. One person steps forward, just one, and it's like the rest of them all wake up at the same moment. 3 or 4 people moved at once. The red-faced man was dialing, phone shaking. Somebody else found their voice and started saying, "Give them room, everyone please back up, give them room." And the crowd actually obeyed, shuffling back, opening a space. A woman near me dropped down and started fanning the old man with her folded-up map, steady, useful. The loud teenagers who'd been laughing 30 seconds ago had gone dead silent, all of them, faces white. And Sophie had her canvas bag open. She pulled out a small bottle of water and a packet of tissues, wet a tissue, and pressed it folded against the back of the old man's neck, cooling the big blood vessels there. I understand now, bringing his temperature down, and the whole time she never stopped talking to him, low and even and warm, a completely different voice from the one she'd used on the crowd. You're all right now, my love, help's on the way, you just stay with me, okay? Stay right here with me. Can you tell me your name? What's your name, sweetheart?" His eyelids fluttered. His mouth moved, working at it dry. And I heard it, everyone near the front heard it, because by now the whole crowd had gone so quiet, so completely silent, that you could hear the flags up on the palace roof snapping and cracking in a wind that hadn't yet found its way down to us on the ground. He said, "Edward." "Edward?" And she smiled at him, this warm, instant, whole smile, like he'd just told her the best news she'd had all year, like he was the only person left in the city. "That's lovely. I'm Sophie. I've got you now, Edward. I'm not going anywhere. You just keep your eyes on me, all right? Just me. Now, here's where it turns. Here's the thing I actually came to tell you, the thing the rest of it has been walking toward." Because Edward, the old man, he didn't keep his eyes on Sophie. They drifted past her shoulder, up, and they found the young guard standing rigid at his post 6, maybe 7 feet away. And the old man's face, gray and slack and frightened as it was a moment ago, it changed. It softened. It opened right up like a door coming open onto a warm room, and his lips moved again, and what came out wasn't for Sophie at all. It was for the guard. He said, "I made it, son. I came back, told you I would." And I watched that young soldier's discipline come apart right down the middle. His eyes came off the horizon, down. Straight down to the old man on the ground, and this time they didn't snap back. They stayed. He wasn't supposed to. Every single thing that uniform had drilled into him for months, maybe years, was screaming at him to hold, eyes front, do not move, and he broke all of it. He looked, and I watched his chin start to go, that helpless wobble you get when you're fighting your own face and your face is winning, and I watched his throat work as he tried to swallow it down and couldn't quite. Sophie saw it. Her eyes went from Edward up to the guard and back down to Edward quick, and something crossed her face. She'd understood something the rest of us hadn't caught up to yet. "Edward," she said, very gently leaning in, "do you know him?" "The guard up there." And the old man's hand came up off the hot pavement, shaking hard, the fingers reaching toward the soldier. "My grandson," he whispered, and it was the most fragile thing I've ever heard a voice do. "That's my grandson up there in the bearskin." A tear came out of the corner of his eye and ran sideways down into the white hair at his temple. I wasn't well enough for his passing out parade. I missed it. I was in the hospital. I couldn't, and I promised him. I promised the boy I'd come and watch him stand on the gate, just the once, just so he'd know that I. He couldn't finish it. The words ran out. And the young guard, the boy who is not allowed to move, who has stood through driving rain and blistering heat and screaming toddlers and drunk men, and 1,000 idiots waving their hands an inch from his eyes, who has held that line through every single test the public could throw at him. That boy took one step out of position, off his post. Somebody in the crowd gasped out loud, "You're just not built to see it. It's like watching a statue in a museum lift its foot off the plinth." The other guard, further down the line, didn't break, held himself perfectly still, eyes locked front, doing both their jobs now. But this one, the young one, he stepped down and he crossed those few feet of pavement and he went down, full uniform, bearskin, scarlet tunic and all, onto his knees beside his grandfather. Not a soul breathed. He didn't speak at first. He just reached out and took the old man's shaking, reaching hand into both of his own white-gloved ones, and he drew it in and held it against his chest, against all those polished buttons, against the scarlet wool over his heart, and he bowed his head down over it. Then he said it, so quietly that I only caught it because everything else had gone silent. "I see you, Grandad, I see you. You made it, you're here." I have to stop for a second whenever I get to this part. Every single time I tell it, "Sorry, give me a moment." Because the old man smiled. A huge smile. A whole one, the kind that takes over a whole face, like every one of those 60 straight-backed years had been quietly leading him to this exact spot on this exact pavement, his grandson kneeling over him in full uniform, holding his hand in front of the palace in the sun. And far off, finally, you could hear the first thin wail of the siren starting to come. The crowd had changed completely by now, changed into something else entirely. There were people openly crying all around me, grown men with their hands over their mouths. Those loud teenagers, 2 of them had their arms wrapped around each other and their faces buried. Rhea had a fistful of my sleeve and her cheeks were soaked, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. This 17-year-old who pretends nothing touches her. And the phones, this is the thing. Almost every phone that had been up in the air a minute before had come down. People had just lowered them, one by one, without anyone telling them to. Like some part of them had remembered all at once that there are things you are meant to witness with your own 2 eyes and not through a little pane of glass. That to film, this would be to steal something from it. Sophie stayed exactly where she was, down on the other side of Edward, keeping that cool tissue pressed to his neck, keeping one eye on his breathing, on his color, but she'd gone quiet now too. She'd pulled back, letting them have it. The grandson and the grandfather. She just kept one hand resting on Edward's shoulder so he'd feel it, so he'd know she hadn't left, and she watched the young guard with a look on her face I can only call fierce. Fierce and tender at once, like she'd physically fight anyone who tried to come and break the moment up. And of course somebody tried. There's always one. A man near the front in a suit, official looking. I never worked out whether he was palace staff or some kind of plainclothes officer or just a self-important bystander who decided he was in charge. He started forward, saying, "The guard needs to return to his post. This really isn't." Sophie stood up. She didn't shout, she didn't make a scene. She just rose up to her full height, planted herself between him and the two men on the ground, and said, in a voice so level and so certain that it stopped him stone dead, "That man has waited his whole life for this. 2 minutes. You can give him 2 minutes." The official opened his mouth, shut it again, and then the strangest thing happened up the line. An older soldier, a sergeant, somebody with more on his sleeves, a man whose whole bearing said he'd seen 40 years of this, he gave one small nod. Just a single small nod, eyes still forward. And the official saw it and he stepped back and he said nothing more. 2 minutes, that's all it really was in the end. The ambulance came round through the parting crowd, and the paramedics moved in fast and calm, and the young guard had to let go of his grandfather's hand so they could get to work on him. He stood up, straightened himself, and you could actually see him doing it, pulling the soldier back on over the grandson, settling the uniform back over the boy, getting himself back under control. But his eyes were red and streaming, and he did not care one bit who saw it, and somehow that was the most soldierly thing of all. They got Edward up onto the stretcher. He was conscious, talking, even weakly. The paramedics were brilliant, fast and gentle, oxygen mask on him, the lot, reading his color back, calling numbers to each other. And as they began to wheel him toward the open back of the ambulance, the old man lifted his hand one more time, up off the stretcher, and the young guard back at his post now, back at attention, eyes front, exactly as he is sworn to be. The young guard did the only thing in the world he was still allowed to do. He held a salute. Stiff, perfect, textbook, arm rigid, hand flat, and he held it and held it and held it long, long after the stretcher had rolled past him, held it as they lifted Edward up into the ambulance, held it as the doors came round, held it with the tears running in clean straight lines down both sides of his face and not one single muscle moving to wipe them away. He just let them fall and held his salute. And from the stretcher just before the doors closed, the old man saluted him back, weak, trembling, the arm barely making it up, but there, returned, grandfather to grandson, soldier to soldier, across the back of an ambulance. Then the doors shut, and the ambulance pulled away slow through the crowd, and people stepped back to let it through, and it was gone. And the young guard slowly lowered his arm back down to his side and turned his face forward and went right back to being a statue. Eyes front, still, straight, chin level, as if nothing at all had happened. Except all of us had seen it. And nothing was ever going to be the same, not for him, and not in some small quiet way for any of us standing there. I went looking for Sophie afterwards. I had to. The crowd was breaking apart now, dazed, everyone moving slow and talking in low voices, that hush that comes over people after they've all witnessed the same big thing together. I found her over by the railings on her own, dusting the grit off the knees of her trousers, tucking the empty water bottle and the tissues back into her canvas bag, looking for all the world like a woman who just wanted to slip off quietly and disappear before anybody made a fuss. "That was incredible," I said, stupidly. It was the only word I had. "What you did, you knew exactly what to do." She gave a small shrug and she looked almost embarrassed, almost like she wished I hadn't come over. "I'm a nurse," she said. "A&E, you don't really think in the moment." You just go. Nobody else went, I said. There were 400 people standing here, and just you. And she looked at me then, really looked at me, with the saddest, gentlest little half-smile. And she said the thing I have carried with me every single day from that one to this. She said somebody always has to be first. That's the whole of it. One person who decides it's going to be them. Everyone else is just waiting. They're not bad people. They're just waiting for someone to start. So you start. And then the rest of them follow. Then she said she really had to get on. She was actually heading into work. A shift starting, of all the things in the world. And she gave Rhea a kind little smile. And she slipped back into the thinning crowd and was gone before I'd even thought to ask her surname. Sophie, A&E nurse. Flat shoes, canvas bag. That is the sum total of everything I know about her. And that's where I'm going to leave the first part of it. Because there's more, quite a lot more. There's what I found out afterwards in the weeks that followed. About Edward, about the boy in the bearskin, about that promise and why it weighed so much. About the war the old man had fought in and the thing he'd never told his family. And there's something that happened weeks later, something I genuinely never saw coming, that brought the whole story round in a full circle and put a lump in my throat I've never quite swallowed since. But for right now, just sit with this one picture for a moment. A crowd of 400 people, every one of us with a phone in our hand, every one of us frozen solid, every one of us waiting for somebody else to go first. And one completely ordinary woman in flat shoes, who looked at a dying man on the ground, and decided that the somebody was going to be her. No one dared step forward. Until Sophie did. And after that, not one of us could look away. For about 3 days after, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That's the honest truth. I'd be doing the most ordinary thing, making a cup of tea, walking to the shop, sitting on the bus, and it would just come back. The clink of those metals against the railing, the gray-blue at the edges of the old man's lips, the young guard's chin going, that helpless wobble, Sophie's voice cutting through the crowd. It looped over and over, the way a thing does when your mind hasn't finished with it yet. And the worst loop, the one I kept landing on, was the 4 or 5 seconds where nobody moved, where I didn't move. I kept replaying it and putting myself in it differently. In the new version, I shoved through the crowd first. In the new version, I was the one on my knees on the hot pavement. But you can't rewrite a thing that's already happened. You can only carry it. Rhea felt it too. She went quiet on the train home, which for her is practically a medical emergency. And then somewhere around Watford she said, out of nowhere, "Do you think he's okay, the old man?" And I realized I had no way of knowing. That was the thing that got me. We'd all stood there and watched this enormous, breaking moment in a stranger's life, the kind of moment that would mark him forever, mark his grandson forever, and then the ambulance doors had shut and that was it. We didn't get to know how it ended. We just had to get on the train and go home and let it sit there, unfinished, inside us. "I don't know, love," I told her. "I really hope so." But I couldn't let it go, and it turned out I didn't have to. It was Rhea, actually, who found the first thread of it. Because of course somebody had filmed it. Several somebodies. I'd seen the phones come down at the worst best part, but plenty had stayed up at the start, and by the time we got home that night, a clip was already going round. Someone had caught the moment the young guard stepped down off his post and knelt. 40-odd seconds of shaky footage, no sound to speak of, just the bearskin going down and those 2 white gloves wrapping round an old man's hand. It was everywhere by the morning. Now I have feelings about that. Real ones. Part of me hated it, hated that a private, sacred thing between a grandfather and his grandson had become content, something to be tapped and swiped past between a recipe video and an advert. Sophie had told that crowd to put their phones down, and the world had picked one back up the second her back was turned. There's something ugly in that, and I won't pretend there isn't. But it's also the only reason I ever learned how the story ended. So I have to hold both things at once, the way you usually do with anything true. Because under that clip, in among the thousands of comments, the actual people started to find each other, people who'd been there. And then, a few days in, somebody who actually knew them, a relative, Edward's daughter, the young guard's aunt. She'd come on, I think, mostly to ask people to stop sharing it, to say the family found it overwhelming. But in doing that, she told us things, small things. And those small things were how I finally got the rest of it. His name was Thomas, the boy in the bearskin, Tom. And the old man, Edward, he was going to be all right. I cannot tell you the relief. I actually had to sit down. It had been a heart thing brought on by the heat, the standing, the strain, but they'd caught it. The paramedics had been quick. Sophie's 2 minutes hadn't cost him anything. If anything, they'd helped, kept him calm, kept him cool. He'd been in for a few days, and he was going to be all right. I read that and I thought, Sophie, wherever you are, he's all right, as if she could hear me. The daughter's name was Margaret, and over a week or two, in dribs and drabs, in replies to kind strangers, she told the shape of the thing. I want to give it to you the way it came to me, because it matters, the way you learn a thing. Edward had served. I'd guessed that from the medals, but I hadn't guessed where or what it had cost. He'd been a very young man, younger than Tom is now when he went, and he'd been part of something hard. Margaret didn't go into the detail, and I respect that. I won't invent it. But she said her father almost never spoke of it, not once properly in her whole childhood. He was a quiet man, a gentle man. He'd come home from wherever he'd been, and he'd built a small, careful, ordinary life. A wife he adored, a daughter, a job in a hardware shop, a garden. And he had folded all of the other thing up very small and put it away somewhere and never taken it out. The medals lived in a drawer for 50 years. Margaret said she'd seen them maybe a handful of times. He never wore them, not on the days you're meant to. He'd go to the service every year standing at the back in an ordinary coat, never the medals. And then Tom joined up. This is the part Margaret told that undid me a bit. Tom was Margaret's son, Edward's grandson, and from the time he was tiny, Tom had been the one who asked, the one who'd sit on the old man's knee and ask about the photographs, the one who, when everyone else had learned not to, would still say, "Granddad, what was it like?" Most kids ask once, get a quiet "oh" a long time ago now, and learn to stop. Tom didn't stop. Tom kept the door open with his patience. And slowly, over years, in tiny pieces, on long walks in the garden late at night, Edward had given Tom things he'd never given anyone else. Not the horror of it, but the rest. The men he'd served with, the ones who didn't come home. The discipline of it, the strange, terrible pride, the way standing still and holding a line can be the bravest thing a body ever does. So when Tom said, at 18, that he wanted to join the army, Margaret said her heart went straight into her shoes, the way any mother's would. But Edward, she said, Edward had quietly cried. Not from fear, from something else. From being seen, maybe, after 50 years of folding it all up small. His grandson wanted to carry the thing he'd carried. And there's no words for what that does to an old soldier. And when Tom passed selection for the regiment that mounts the guard, when the boy was actually going to stand on that gate in the bearskin and the scarlet in front of the palace, Edward had said he would be there. For the passing out parade. He'd be there in the crowd. He'd wear the medals. For Tom, I'll wear them. First time in 50 years. And then he got ill, and he couldn't go. He missed it, the one parade. The boy looked for his grandfather in the crowd, and the old man wasn't there because the old man was in a hospital bed, and Margaret said it broke something in her father that the illness hadn't managed to break. Not being there, letting the boy down, after everything. So he made the promise we all heard him keep, lying on the pavement. I'll come and watch you on the gate, just once, just so you'll know. He waited months to be well enough. And the day he finally was a Tuesday in the worst heat of the year, when he absolutely should not have been standing in the sun in a wool blazer for 2 hours, he went anyway. Because a promise to that boy was worth more to him than his own heart. That's why he collapsed. He'd half known he might, and he went anyway. When I understood that, I had to put my phone down and go and stand in the garden for a while. Now here's where my own part in it picks back up, because I'm not just a voice telling you a story off the internet. I was there, and I found I couldn't just read about it from a distance and let it close. It had its hooks in me. I wanted Sophie to know. That was the thing that wouldn't leave me alone. This woman had knelt down in front of 400 people and saved an old man's afternoon, maybe his life, and then she'd gathered up her little canvas bag and gone off to work a shift, and she would never, ever know how it turned out. She'd never know his name was Edward and he made it. She'd never know the boy was his grandson, or about the 50 years of medals in a drawer, or that he was going to be all right. She'd given everything and walked away with nothing, not even the ending. And that felt wrong to me, properly wrong, the kind of wrong you feel you have to do something about. But all I had was Sophie, A&E nurse, flat shoes, somewhere in London. You try finding one nurse called Sophie in London. Go on. I'm not proud of how much time I spent on it. Margaret had no idea who the nurse was by the time the paramedics arrived. Sophie had already melted back into the crowd, exactly as I'd watched her do. The family knew there'd been a woman. They were grateful to a person with no name. In one of her replies, Margaret actually wrote that they'd love to thank her but had no way to find her, and the comments under that were full of people saying find the nurse, find Sophie, total strangers, hundreds of them, suddenly invested in finding one quiet woman who hadn't asked for any of it. And I thought I was there. I saw her face. I'm closer to this than any of them. So I tried. I put out a post of my own, careful, not sharing the painful footage, just saying, I was there that day, I spoke to the nurse afterwards, her name's Sophie, A&E, if anyone knows her, the family she helped would love to thank her. That kind of thing. Mostly nothing came back. A lot of kindness, a lot of this made me cry, not much use. And then, about 10 days in, a message landed in my inbox that changed the whole shape of it. It was short, from a woman I didn't know. It said something like, I think the nurse you're looking for might be my colleague. There's a Sophie on our unit who came in late one Tuesday in July and mentioned something happened outside the palace, but she's never made a thing of it. She'd genuinely die if she knew this was going round. Please don't share her details. But if the family really want to thank her, I could maybe pass something on, quietly. I read it about 4 times. And here's the thing that got me, the thing that fits so completely with the woman I'd met for 90 seconds by the railings. She's never made a thing of it. The whole internet was looking for her. There were strangers in 3 countries trying to find the palace nurse. And she'd gone into work that same evening and said, what? Oh, bit of a thing happened outside Buckingham today, and then got on with her shift and never mentioned it again. She didn't know she was famous. She didn't want to be. She'd told me herself, hadn't she, you don't think, you just go. To Sophie it wasn't a story, it was a Tuesday. It was the job. It was just the thing any decent person does, and she genuinely couldn't understand why anyone would make a fuss. That's when I understood something about her that the clip never could have shown. The kneeling down was extraordinary, but so was the walking away. So was the not needing anyone to know. There's a kind of goodness that performs itself, and there's a kind that hides, and hers was the hiding kind, and the hiding kind is rarer than gold. I wrote back to the colleague straight away. I said, please, please don't make her uncomfortable. But there's a family, there's an old soldier named Edward and his grandson Tom, who's a king's guard, and they would give anything just to say thank you. No cameras, no fuss. Could you maybe just connect them, quietly, let them decide? She said she'd ask. And then I had to wait. And I want to be honest with you about something. Somewhere in the waiting, I started to worry I'd done a wrong thing. That maybe the kindest thing for Sophie was to be left completely alone. That maybe by hunting her down, I'd become exactly the thing she'd told the crowd not to be, someone who couldn't just let a sacred moment be private. I lay awake on that one. While I waited, Tom went back to the gate. I know that because, and I almost didn't go, I felt strange about it, like a tourist at someone else's life, but I went back to the palace. A couple of weeks after, on my own this time. No Rhea. I told myself I just wanted to see the place again, but that wasn't really it. I wanted to see if he was there. The boy. And he was. I almost didn't recognize the spot without the crowd memory laid over it. The heat had broken by then, there was proper weather, gray and cool, far fewer people. But there he was on the gate in the bearskin and the scarlet. Eyes front, still, straight. Exactly the way he'd been before any of it happened. You'd never have known. You'd look at him and see a statue, same as I always had, same as I'd told Rhea, they're trained for it, love. And you'd never in 100 years guess that 2 weeks ago that same man had broken every rule he had and knelt on the pavement and wept in front of 400 strangers because his grandfather kept a promise. I stood across from him for a long while. I didn't wave. I didn't try to catch his eye, God no. I'd learned that much. I just stood there, a quiet middle-aged bloke in a crowd of nobody, and I looked at him and I thought, I know what's inside that uniform now. I won't ever forget it again. And just once, and I might have imagined it, I'll never be sure, just once his eyes moved. The smallest flick off the horizon across the small crowd. Maybe nothing. Maybe a bird. But for half a second I'd swear they passed over me, and there was the faintest something in his face, gone before it arrived. The ghost of a thing a statue isn't allowed to feel. Then front again, still straight. I went home. The reply from Sophie's colleague came a few days after that. And it wasn't quite what I'd braced for. It was better and it was harder both at once. She said she'd told Sophie, carefully. Sat her down and showed her a bit of it, not the painful footage, but the kindness underneath it, the hundreds of strangers, the family looking for her. And she said Sophie had gone very still, and then gone a bit pink, and then, this is the line that stayed with me, she said she didn't do it to be found. Of course she did. But and here's the part that opened the whole next chapter. The colleague said that when Sophie heard the old man's name was Edward, and that he was a veteran, that he'd worn his medals for the first time in 50 years to keep a promise to his grandson on the gate. Sophie had cried. Just sat there at the staff room table and quietly cried. And nobody quite understood why, because nurses see hard things every single day and Sophie was about the steadiest of all of them. It wasn't like her. The colleague said she didn't push it, but she had the strong feeling that it wasn't only kindness. That something in that particular story, the old soldier, the promise, the grandson in uniform, had reached into Sophie and touched something she didn't talk about either. That something in Sophie's own story matched something in Edward's. The colleague didn't know what. Said she'd never seen Sophie cry in 4 years of nights and traumas, and the worst the city can do. And she said, I think she might want to meet him, the old man. I think she actually might. But she's frightened of it and I don't fully understand why. So that's where I have to leave you for the second part. Because I didn't understand it either, not yet. I had an old soldier who'd kept a promise that nearly killed him. I had a grandson who'd broken every rule of his uniform to kneel beside him. And I had a nurse who'd saved him and vanished. A nurse the whole world was looking for, who didn't want to be found, who'd done the bravest thing in the crowd and then sat at a staff room table weeks later and cried over a stranger's name. There was a thread running underneath all of it that I couldn't see yet. A reason Sophie went first when 400 people froze. A reason that particular old man, that particular promise, reached all the way into her and pulled something loose. I was about to find out what it was. And when Edward and Tom and Sophie were finally all in one room together, which they were in the end, which I'll tell you about, what came out was the thing I never, ever saw coming. The thing that turned this from a story about a kind stranger into something else entirely. But that's the last part. For now, just hold on to this. The bravest person in that crowd wasn't the one who stepped forward because she felt nothing. She stepped forward because she, of everyone there, knew exactly what it was to be the person on the ground. It took 6 weeks to get them all in one room. Not because anyone was difficult. Because of Sophie, mostly, because every time it got close to being arranged, she'd find a reason it wasn't the right week. A shift. A swap. A let's not make it a big thing. The colleague who'd connected us kept me updated gently, and I started to understand that Sophie wasn't being shy about being thanked. It was something else. She was frightened of meeting Edward specifically, of being in a room with that particular old man. And I didn't push. I'd learned my lesson on the pushing. I just let Margaret know it might happen, might not, and to leave the door open and not crowd it. It was Edward in the end who made it happen. Margaret told me this part after. Once he was properly back on his feet, the old man had got it into his head, stubborn as anything, apparently, the way the gentle ones go stubborn, that he was not going to let the matter rest until he had thanked the woman who knelt down for him. He didn't care about the clip. He barely understood the internet. He just kept saying, "Somebody held my hand on that pavement and told me I was all right, and I will know her name before I'm done." So Margaret arranged a small tea, her house. Nothing grand. Edward, Margaret, and because he managed to get the leave for it, Tom, and if she'd come, Sophie. And me, they asked me, which I hadn't expected and which I'll be grateful for as long as I live. Because I'd been the one looking, I think, because I'd been there. Margaret said, "You should see how it ends. You started the finding of her." So I went. I got there first, with Margaret fussing over a kettle that didn't need fussing over, the way people do when they're nervous. And then Tom arrived out of the uniform, in jeans and a plain jumper, and it was the strangest thing to see him as just a young man. He had his grandfather's eyes. I hadn't been able to see that under the bearskin. Same set to them. He shook my hand and said thank you quiet, and I could see he didn't quite know what to do with the whole thing either, this private moment that had gone so public. Then Edward. I'd only ever seen him in 2 states, straight-backed and proud by the railings and gray on the ground. Now he was somewhere in between, a small, neat old man in a cardigan, moving slow but moving, and when he came into the room he looked at me and said, "You were there." "I was, sir." He took my hand in both of his. The same gesture his grandson had made, I realized, on the pavement, must run in them. "Then thank you," he said, "for not letting it just vanish, for finding her." And before I could say anything about how I wasn't sure she'd even come, the doorbell went. And it was Sophie. She looked exactly the same. That's the thing that struck me. The same completely ordinary woman in the same sensible shoes, out of the canvas bag now, holding a small plant in a pot, the kind of thing you bring when you don't know what to bring. And she stood in the doorway and she looked into that room at Edward, and Edward looked back at her, and the two of them just stopped, stood there, looking. Then Edward said very softly, "It's you." And Sophie said, "It's me." And he opened his arms, this small old man, and she crossed the room and folded down, and he held her, and she held him, and over his shoulder I could see her face, and she had her eyes shut, and her face was doing the thing the colleague had described. Crying without a sound, holding on to a man she'd met once for 90 seconds on the worst afternoon of his summer. Margaret was crying. Tom had his jaw set hard the way I'd seen it set on the gate, holding it in. I was no use to anyone, I'll be honest. And after a while, Edward held her back at arm's length and looked at her properly, this searching look. And he said, not unkindly, just puzzled, just gentle, "Why are you crying, love?" "I'm the one who fell over." And that's when it came out, the thing under everything. Sophie sat down. She had a cup of tea she didn't drink, and she said she'd debated whether to even come, because she'd known if she came she'd probably have to say it, and she'd never said it to a stranger before. But she thought Edward, of all people, had earned it. She said, "I knew what to do that day, on the pavement. I'm a nurse, so yes, but it wasn't only that." She turned the cup round in her hands. "My dad," she said, "was a soldier." The room went very still. He served a long time, came home different the way some of them do, quiet, folded it all away and never talked about it. Sound familiar? She gave Edward the smallest smile. He had medals in a drawer he never wore. He'd go to the service every year in an ordinary coat and stand at the back. I used to wonder why he didn't wear them. I was a kid. I didn't understand that wearing them meant taking it out of the drawer, and taking it out of the drawer meant feeling it again. Edward had gone very still too. He understood. Of course he understood. It was his own life she was describing. And he collapsed, Sophie said. My dad, out one day in the street, his heart. The heat, the strain, all of it folding in on a body that had carried too much for too long. She looked down. And I wasn't there. I don't even remember where I was. Somewhere stupid. And by the time anyone reached him. She didn't finish it. She didn't have to. He died on a pavement, she said, with strangers standing round him. And for years I told myself, well, what could anyone have done? It was his heart, it was quick. But I always thought, did anyone go to him? Did anyone kneel down? Or did they all just stand there with their... Her voice broke, the first time it had in the whole telling. So when I saw your dad go down, she said to Margaret, to Tom, and I saw 400 people just standing there, I wasn't brave. Everyone keeps saying brave. I wasn't. I was the opposite of brave. I went because I couldn't bear it. Because I'd spent years imagining my own dad on the ground with nobody kneeling, and there it was, right in front of me, happening to somebody else's dad, and I couldn't let it be the same. I couldn't let one more old soldier go down in a crowd, and have nobody go to him. She looked up finally at Edward. I went to your grandfather, she said to Tom, because nobody went to mine. Nobody spoke for a long moment. And then Edward, small, neat, careful Edward, who'd nearly died keeping a promise, leaned forward and took Sophie's 2 hands in his, the way he'd taken mine. And he said, then let me tell you something, as one of them, as one of the old ones who folds it all up small. He held her hands tight. Your dad, he said, on that pavement, I don't know if anyone knelt. I wasn't there, and I won't lie to you and say they did. His thumb moved over the back of her hand. But I know this. When I went down, when it was me on the ground, and the sky was going funny, and I thought, well, this might be it, this might be where I go, do you know what I felt? Through all of it. Sophie shook her head. I felt hands, Edward said. I felt cool on the back of my neck. I heard a voice telling me I was all right, telling me to stay, telling me her name was Sophie. And I want you to hear me, love, for those few minutes I was the most looked-after man in London. I was not alone, not for 1 second. He leaned in closer. You couldn't be there for your dad. I know what that's cost you, I can see it on you, I've worn it myself. But you were there for me. And I think when you knelt down for me, in some way the good Lord lets work, you were kneeling for him too. You finally got to be the one who went. You got to give the thing you never got to give. His voice was thick now. So you can put it down, love. You went. You finally went. Let yourself have that. And Sophie put her face in her hands and wept properly then, for the first time in years. I think, the way you weep when something you've carried for a decade is finally allowed to be set on the floor. And Tom, the boy who held the line, who breaks for no one, Tom got up out of his chair, crossed the room, and knelt down in front of her, same as he'd knelt for his grandfather, and he didn't say anything clever. He just took her hands away from her face gently and held them and said, Thank you for my granddad. That was all, thank you for my granddad. And I had to go and stand in Margaret's kitchen for a bit, because some moments aren't yours to be in the middle of. There's not much more to tell, the good kind of not much more. They became something to each other, the 4 of them, 5 if I'm allowed to count myself, and I think I'm allowed. Sophie comes to Sunday lunch now sometimes. Margaret told me Edward calls her my Sophie. And Edward, the old man, finally took the medals out of the drawer for good, wears them now every year to the service, stands at the front. Tom told me his granddad said that if a stranger could kneel down on hot stone for a man she'd never met, then he could manage to stand at the front in his own metals. That folding it all up small had been a way of being alone with it, and he was done being alone with it. Tom's still on the gate, still a statue when you look at him, still eyes front, still and straight the way they all are, the way I used to think meant nothing was inside. But I know better now. We all should. Every one of those young men and women standing rigid in the heat and the rain while we point and pose and laugh, every single one of them is somebody's grandson, somebody's daughter, carrying a whole life inside a uniform that won't let it show. The stillness isn't emptiness. It's the most human thing there is, a person holding everything in, because they've been asked to, because that's the job, because that's the promise. And sometimes, if a grandfather keeps his own promise, and a stranger keeps a promise she didn't even know she'd made to a dead man years ago, sometimes the statue moves. Sometimes you get to see what's underneath. I still go past the palace now and then, less than I used to somehow. It means too much now to do casually. But when I do, I stand across from the gate, and I look at whichever young soldier is holding it that day, and I don't see stone anymore. I see Tom going down on his knees. I see Edward's medals coming up off the railing one last time. And I see a woman in flat shoes pushing through 400 frozen people because she could not stand to watch it happen again. Everyone in that crowd had a reason not to move. Too hot, too crowded, not my business. Someone else will go. 400 good and ordinary people, all waiting for permission that was never going to come. And one woman who'd already lost a man on a pavement, who knew exactly what the ground feels like, who went first not because she was braver than the rest of us, but because she, of everyone there, knew there was no such thing as someone else. No one dared step forward. Until Sophie did. And when she knelt down on that hot gray stone, she wasn't just saving an old man's life. She was finally going back for her own,